As I've looked at the bass station as an underdog against a sub 37, I thought it was only fair to hold it up against another synth more within its price bracket. And similarly, I've looked at the Monologue versus the Uno, which is a lot cheaper than the Monologue. So this is really looking at the middle ground between these two synths. If you're looking to spend between $200 and $400, for example, admittedly this is £350, $400. I've just seen one new for $325 in the UK, and the Monologue's about £215 or $300, so it's around $100 more for the bass station, and that's not a huge difference, but it's not to be sniffed at. If you're working to a tight budget, that $100 could get you a pretty decent reverb or delay pedal, especially if you're looking at the used market, which I think is probably essential for most of us if we're playing synths. So bear with me on this one, because it might look like the bass station is completely destroying the Korg, especially with this new update at the start. But like I said, the sub 37 versus bass station comparison, the additional features may not be of interest to you. Essentially, they may simply not add up to the usefulness of having a reverb or delay pedal with a Monologue. So to dig in straight away, looking at the form factor and the interface, from a form factor point of view, they both feel like a really nice professional bit of kit. Very knobby surfaces on the keys. Obviously this has got full-size keys and this has got the mini keys. I prefer full-size keys, but the mini keys don't bother me too much. Neither of them feel plasticky. I think this is a plastic and this is aluminium, but it's still quite a weighty keyboard. It feels like a professional bit of kit. I have to say, I think the Monologue's a lot more attractive than the bass station. This is quite utilitarian looking, and it sort of harks back to the very first bass station, but there's nothing wrong with that. The Monologue just feels a bit more modern. An oddity with the Monologue is that it starts on a low A, whereas every other synth I've got starts on a low C, except for perhaps the Voyager and the Minimoog that start on an F. So it's the only keyboard I've got that starts on an E, and I think that's so that guitarists can get used to it. I don't see that myself. I think it's a bit confusing. If you're used to using standard keyboards, it's just a bit odd having it on an E. I mean, it might just help you make some different melodies or different bass lines, especially if you're playing in a band. But for doing this comparison, it makes it really awkward trying to find my way around, trying to get equal notes on the same keyboards. Not sure Korg were thinking about me making comparison videos when they designed the Monologue though. It's worth noting that the bass station's got multiple uses for a number of the knobs. So these oscillator knobs are for oscillators 1 and 2, and the sliders for the ADSR envelopes for the amp envelope and the mod envelope are both the same sliders, so you can spend a while tweaking your decay so it bounces nicely with a loop, and then nudge it when you're trying to change your amplitude envelope and you've changed the cutoff instead. So just got to train yourself to use those. This has got a lot less going on the interface, but that's because it's got a lot less functionality overall. So this is more like a knob per function. This has got multiple uses for a couple of the knobs. It's not the end of the world, but it does mean that they've managed to fit an awful lot into this space, and there's an awful lot of functionality packed into there. And although it's more expensive than the Monologue, it's still a fantastic low price for what you get. So really, interface-wise, swings and roundabouts, less functions, but knob per function, more functions, but multiple uses per knob. So just to round up on the interfaces, really, global menus are accessed on this using the function key plus any of the keys. So this got mod wheel section, aftertouch, LFO, oscillator, velocity, VCA, ARP, and global. On this, your menus are accessed via these edit keys here. Press the edit key. You've got program edit, sequence edit, and global edit. And I don't know if you can see these flashing, but these are the sequencer keys. I'll talk about these later. So edit mode, master tune, metronome, MIDI channel, etc., etc. So there's all sorts of things in here, and it's a lot easier to use this one actually, just because you've got the LED. They've managed to do this whole synth using these sort of old 70s style display here, but it functions perfectly. You get used to it really quickly, but it is nice having a little LED. For this and the new functions, I've got a little printout of what the new functions are. So for example, function and is it swing? Yeah, that gets you into the Aphex mode. I'll show that later as well. But you do have to remember, on this you can figure it out. And I suppose just one additional bit on the interface is it's difficult to see on this, in the dark especially, where your knobs are pointing, because it's all black with just an indent. And that's a really minor thing, but might not be so minor if you're looking for the right knob in the dark in a gig. So let's start off with the oscillators. We'll start off with an initial patch, right? Yes, so here we go. And here's one I prepared earlier. Let's get them at the same. So as I said earlier, this has got two oscillators, or two main oscillators I should say, because it's also got a sub that I'll talk about in a minute. And the first main two oscillators, oscillators 1 and 2 accessed through the mixer here, are identical. You have 4 wave shapes, so you have a sine, you have a triangle, the sawtooth, and the square. And the square, you can alter the pulse width manually using the modulation envelope, which is this, or LFO2. So let's just click it on manual. Doesn't quite go through 0, it goes really thin though. And you have a range from 16 2, and you can adjust them by plus or minus an octave each. So you can go from all the way to plus. Using the octave buttons on this, you can go up and down the keyboard. I don't know if anyone can hear that, maybe your dog. So there's a huge range on that, and as I say, oscillator 2 is identical. The Monologue, on the other hand, this is really quite an odd one. It's got 2 oscillators, but they're completely different to each other. In that, VCO1, you can have a sawtooth, a triangle, or a square. Sawtooth. That's got some bass to it, that, hasn't it? And also, it's an octave below the sawtooth. That is a bit weird that the sawtooth's an octave higher. Anyway, you've got 3 wave shapes, and you can't adjust the octave or the tuning in any way on those. On oscillator 2, you have a sawtooth again, triangle again, and noise. So you can only get a square from VCO1, and VCO2 is the only one you can change the octave or the pitch, so you can go from triangle, and you can adjust the pitch plus or minus an octave on this as well. So let's exit that mode so we can see here. So this is adjusting fine pitch, and on this you won't be able to see it on the video, I'm sure, but you can see it a 1200 cent. So if we pull the octave down, we go to as low as we can on the keyboard, we can go from to so again, huge range on them both. But I was surprised that this doesn't have an octave switch on VCO1, and thought it would really affect the sounds I could make from it, because normally you can't necessarily change pitch on oscillator 1, like for the mini mode, for example, but you can change the octave. But actually you can still get a huge range, because you can go from -1 octave to +2 octaves plus the extra pitch. So you can get a 3 or 4 octave range from that between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, and you can get more with the base station. But I've not really found that on tracks with sounds that have got like a 4 or 5 octave difference between VCO1 and VCO2, so it's not really a big issue. And I think they've cleverly picked the wave shapes they've used, because it's not often you use dual squares, for example, on a bass tone. But if you do want to use the square, you are sort of limited in that you can't really adjust it via the octaves. You need to use the octave switch here, which is just the octave for the keyboard. So if you're playing via MIDI, it might be something you have to be aware of. But as I say, it's not something that's bothered me in the least. Another reason for me not finding the oscillators limiting on this is because they've got this magic sort of secret weapon here called shape. So on VCO1 you can change the shape of the oscillators. So from a square, it changes the pulse width. All the way to 0. and back to a square. On the triangle, seems like it's adding another triangle halfway through the phase and just pushing it up. I don't know what's doing there. It's nice though. And on the sawtooth, and these can all be modulated using the shape on LFO, well, on the LFO, not LFO1. So there's a huge range of timbres you can get from this that you can't get on the base station. So let's use the mixer section and start adding 2 oscillators. Change the pitch. Fourth there, or 4 semitones I should say. On this we would add the second oscillator, go to oscillator select, on a sawtooth, now you'll notice that's bang on, and this is DCO, this is VCO. When you turn this on, it calibrates itself. It takes a couple of minutes to do that. But you do hear in the sounds, let's put this back at 0. You can hear there's movement, and if you look at the frequency analysis, you can see there's movement. And they're perfectly in tune with each other according to this. No movement whatsoever, and these are perfectly in tune. You've got coarse tune here and fine tune here. So if you want your analog synth to be VCO, not DCO, it's the Monologue. Now if that swayed you towards the Monologue, maybe this will sway you back to the base station. The sub-oscillator on this has now been decoupled from oscillator 1, which means it can completely be detuned using this function key and coarse. There we go. I'm now detuning on here the sub. So the sub isn't in tune with the oscillator, with oscillator 1. So let's just have oscillator 1, add the sub. Just check what I'm doing. Oscillator 1's actually in tune. And just in the sub, do -7. But the magic is that this is now really a 3 oscillator synth, and that's sort of leaving this behind from that perspective. 2 oscillators and a sub has now become 3. I think it's incredible. It's an amazing update. But oh no, it's not VCO. Ooh, the VCO sounded nice there. So maybe not such a crazy comparison after all. This has got the really nice wave shaping functionality, plus it's VCO. This has got 2 completely independent identical oscillators plus a decouplable sub-oscillator. So we finished this mixer section. This mixer section here, we've got VCO1 and VCO2, but we can sync VCO2 to VCO1 and we can have ring modulation. So let's just take a look at that. 2 oscillators. And let's adjust the pitch. sync sounds. Let's get some ring noises. Let's take this off for a second. This you have the option of sync or ring, or neither. On this you add sync using this key here, so function sync on. Let's turn the sub oscillator off. Change the pitch of oscillator 2. Let's change that with the modulation depth like we did on that. There's your typical sync sound from that. On this you can have sync and ring, but that doesn't really make much sense as the ring modulations. It's the sum and difference of the two oscillators, isn't it? Whereas if they're both at the same frequency, you're not really going to get much ring, but we'll add it anyway. Now let's take sync off. Function, let's sync off. Now you're getting your ring mod. Let's try and do a ring mod that matches on both, see how similar they sound. So matching up the frequencies. So they do sound slightly different, so let's have a little explore of that just to feel the character of it. You can add a square to this. Can't do that on this. Gives a really rich, rough tone, doesn't it? On this, then you can turn the ring down and have the second oscillator still running. Completely out of tune at the minute. On this, it's mixed in with VCO2, so it's slightly less flexible, but still. Still getting those sort of nice sounds. Let's put something like that on here. So just playing with these and messing about with the ring modulator gives me an overall impression of the synths. This sounds a little grittier and harsher, and this sounds a bit more refined. I like the character of this one. So like I say, buying a synth isn't just about what functions it's got, it's about how it would fit in with your music. The other thing this has is noise as a separate oscillator. And here you've got this odd switch. When I first got this, I couldn't work out how it worked because I didn't read the manual. But you've got external in and adjusted via that. The ring modulation just adjusted via this, and the noise. And it's not either external or ring or noise. You can have all three running, and you set the value. So the external value there, then let's set the ring value. And then I can go and add noise. It doesn't change the ring value, so take the noise off. I'll put the noise back on. Back into the ring. So the noise value is still around there somewhere. So that's really a clever little knob, but it's got three uses which can be very confusing. But at least with the external, you can adjust the volume as it comes in. On this you can't. You have to adjust it before it gets into the synth. There's no way in the mixer section of changing the volume of an external signal. So we've done oscillators and mixer. Next up is the filter. Here's the filter section on the Monologue, and here's the filter section on the base station. So the first thing you notice is there's a lot more going on with the filter here. It has 12 dB or 24 dB, low pass, band pass and high pass. So that's 6 plus an acid. Can't change that on the acid. Plus an acid mode. So it's got 7 different modes in total. This has just got 1. But this is a great sounding filter, and when you think of classics like the Mini Moog, Pro 1, Odyssey and the SH101, they all had single filter options, or no, well, it's not really an option if you only got one, isn't it? So I don't see that as a disadvantage. Again, I think it just demonstrates how versatile this can be. But again, it's all to do with how the filter fits in with your music style. I've got to say, I mainly use low-pass filters, but bandpass are very handy on lots of things. So it's a shame it doesn't have more, but I wouldn't expect it to. It's, you know, it's a £215 VCO synth. So let's demo these. Classic 24. So you can hear the difference straight away there. I was wondering why this sounded so dull. It's because using the acid filter, completely different sound. Okay, so straight off, bass station sounds a bit brighter. Or does this sound warmer? Depends how you word it, I suppose. So let's add some resonance. And let's put that about 2 kilohertz. I'll just turn that down, watch your ears. Take the M depth off. Let's try that over here. I'm looking at the frequency analysis of that, and if you've got a dog or a cat in the room, that would just screamed in agony, because that peaks up really high, that does. So there's a big difference straight away. Knocking this to full. Turn it down a bit for you. It's bringing out a couple of extra mad harmonics in that. Let's try this one on full. So let's have a little play around with that. Let's knock the resonance down a little so we're not hurting ourselves. Do the same over here. So keeping the resonance at about 2 kilohertz and a little bit louder than the fundamental. 2 distinct tones. Okay, let's keep the resonance at about 1 kilohertz and just a little bit above the fundamental. Let's look at those two together. And then this. So the frequency analysis looks the same, but they sound completely different, don't they? Can't go lower on that. I'd have to change it to VCO2. I'll just bring that down. VCO1 off. Ring off. So playing around a little bit, I'm finding not only is it difficult to keep track of what octave I'm playing, I'm finding this is sounding more musical, maybe? More like it's singing to me. And that one's definitely harsher. Just as you bring the resonance up, the Monologue's an awful lot grittier, I'm thinking. And the bass station's more musical. Saying it's more musical is an odd term because gritty is musical as well. But I think if you want more raucous tones, the Monologue's the one. But if you want more classic, I think this is a bit more Roland-y sounding. The bass station's there. I'm really enjoying this actually. It's, you know, I know they've got differences and I sort of know what the characters of them both are, but it's not until you got them side by side you can really, it really shines out how different they are. So, to summarise, this filter is grittier and dirtier and harsher. But then on this, I mean, I've only been looking at the 24 dB classic. Go to acid. Doesn't self-oscillate like TB303s don't. Prefer the Monologue for that. Oddly, I do prefer the Monologue for the acid sounds. Strange. Let's look at the envelope generators next. This has got two completely independent separate ADSRs. I'll take a look at them in a second, but they're sort of what you expect. This is more interesting and less flexible. They've kept one envelope generator and that's always attached to the amplitude. And you have three modes. You've got attack and decay, which was that one there. Let's just have a listen. So with no sustain, then you've got one that'll hold a sustain. And then you've got a second one, which is just a gate. But it will do an attack and decay with whichever you've picked from the modulation section. So there's a pitch of oscillator 1, oscillator 2, or the cutoff. But if you do need a second envelope, the LFO has got a one-shot mode, so you can use it in a ramp, for example, or a sawtooth, and it'll drop down. And that's independent of the envelope generator, that sound. So try it with a cutoff. So we've got a different attack and decay with the amplitude than we have with the cutoff. Of course, you've used your LFO then, but it is flexible, but you've got to think about how you use this much more carefully than you do on a standard synth. And this being much more like a standard synth, you've got ADSR and you can adjust the amplitude envelope, the modulation envelope, or both at the same time. So the modulation routines on the Bass Station 2 are so much more flexible than on the Monologue. You can modulate the pitch of oscillators 1 and 2 while simultaneously adjusting the pulse width of 1 and 2 and the cutoff frequency all at the same time. On the Monologue, it's either the pitch of oscillator 1, the pitch of oscillator 2, or the cutoff. And as I say, these aren't ADSR, these are these sort of A and D or ASD. So while we're looking at modulation, let's take a look at the LFOs. On the Bass Station, you've got two LFOs. You've got a delay time and a speed for each of them. And you've got a choice of 4 wave shapes. You've got triangle, sawtooth, square, or sample and hold. On the Korg Monologue, you have just 3 wave shapes. You've got a sawtooth, triangle, and a square. You don't have sample and hold. There's no delay time, you've just got a single rate knob, but you do have a fast and a slow rate option, plus the one-shot mode I've just mentioned. On the Bass Station, LFO1 modulates the pitch of the oscillators, and LFO2 modulates the pulse width and the cutoff frequency. On the Monologue, the LFO can adjust the pitch of the oscillators, the shape of the oscillators, and the cutoff, and the shape's its sort of party piece, because it's not just PWM. You can modulate the shape of the sawtooth. That's a sawtooth, and let's put it into a fast mode. So that's a way of getting FM style sounds as well as the ring mod. On the bass station you get those sort of FM sounds using the oscillator filter mod, which uses one of the oscillators to adjust the cutoff frequency. So all sorts of sonic madness can be had by either of them, really. Okay, let's take a look at the sequencer and arpeggiator sections. The bass station has an arpeggiator and a sequencer. The Monologue only has a sequencer. It's a bit of a shame it hasn't got an arpeggiator, but the sequencer is excellent. I'm not going to demonstrate how they all work, but this is an arpeggiator, obviously. What's going on there? Bass station's got this weird rhythm thing, so it'll take what the arpeggiator's playing and plays various rhythms around it, which is pretty cool. So it's not a standard arpeggiator in that sense. It's got a little trick up its sleeve. And you can record 3 separate sequences per patch, each of up to 32 notes. So let's record something. There we go, let's play that back. Very simple, and then you could have another one on the sequence 2. Very simple. You get the gist. And you can add rests and you can latch notes and stuff, so it's quite flexible and it's really fun to play, but it's nowhere near as flexible as the Monologue. And this is where this little screen comes into its own, and this is what these 16 buttons are for. So on this we can either step record or we can record with a metronome. So you can hear the metronome playing there. So each of these lights indicates, I don't know if you can see that on the video, I think you just about can. Each of the lights indicates a note, and then you can go in and you can play with those notes. You can change them. So if we could hold this, let's have a listen to it. Let's change that one to a low G. Let's put on record first, that to a low G. So really easy to edit, and we can look at slide between them. So I'm not going to go into the whole depth of how you do stuff on them, as I say, but you can see straight away it's just easy to do. And then they've got this motion sequencer here, so there's no motion data in there. We can have 4 tracks of motion, so let's play. And you probably can't see, but there's things appearing here. And they're the cut off on that. One's the resonance, one's the cut off. And you can go into individual notes and change it. So this is just going to play really high resonance and really low cut off on that note there. Let's maybe add, I don't know, some noise. So this really shines from a sequencer perspective, and some of the presets in it are just incredible. Some of the presets have been written by the Aphex Twin, and he's been involved with the micro tuning on this and with producing some patches for this, so quite interesting. The micro tuning on this, on both of them's pretty cool. And this also has an Aphex Twin mode, which is one of the later releases. So let's just bring that in, go to, I think it's that twice, and take that off. I've got to turn it on. Playing a different note for every key. Pretty cool. And that's about as unique as you get in the synth world. Don't know anything else that does that. That's superb. So using this mode, you could use a slightly different variation on each of your notes for each of the keys. Then you've got this really weird glitchy style sequences you can make. So let's try that. Let's try the Aphex Twin mode, and we'll put a different sort of spin on every key, shall we? So let's function, swing, swing. We're in Aphex mode. Number 5's got no overlays on it, so let's change that. Let's change the bottom notes. Let's just start playing with the parameters. Let's add oscillator 2 or some ring modulation or something on D sharp. This is fun. So you can see if you start then adding that to a sequence perhaps. Let's play that back. So although the sequencer on this has sort of got those 4 channels, you could say this has got, I don't know, 80 channels really, but massively interesting that you could spend hours doing a really nice sort of, well, as I say, you've got 4 different sequences that you can use, 32 notes each. So a patch could be just sort of infinitely amazing, couldn't it? If you had the patience to do it, which I don't. That's what DAWs are for me. So finally, we've got some distortion modes. So this is add-in drive here. I know I'm going for an acid sound, it's a sort of obvious one to do. But try that here. So you can overdrive the filter. We'll overdrive your sound, or you've got distortion here. So they can both do it. They've both got their own sort of characters. Both nice, nothing in that really, except for this has got an overdrive into the filter, and I think this is after. They both have librarians. The base station's got sort of online version, one you can download, and this is one that you can download. They don't have editors, although there's a free editor online for the base station. I think you can buy one as well, and there's one you can buy, I think it's €5.90. So I'm going to try and emulate some of the base station sounds on the Monologue. I'm doing it that way around because I do have the free editor for this online, and you can I can just see what it's doing rather than try and work out what the Monologue's doing. So after saying the envelope generator sort of flexibility on this isn't of massive importance, the very first sound I try and recreate of just a really simple, but it requires me to use the LFO and single shot mode to get the snappiness in the filter decay while retaining the sustain level of the amplitude. And I've never noticed that that can't really do that before, because when I'm playing with a sound, I probably normally do it. I take that to cut off, put that to there, forget that one. But if I hold it on, put it onto this. As I hold it, you don't get the snap. So, sounds simple, really did require a little bit of thinking through. But it did make me laugh at the very first sound. I thought, that's a really simple sound, no problem. And all of a sudden I'm getting my head mangled trying to work out how to do it. But I could do it. Let's add a bit more snap to that one. And hear that tone at the end. That's the sound of the filter. You can't adjust that. One sounds like different vowel sounds, aren't they, really? One sounds like someone oohing and one's more like a humming. Okay, let's add a sub to that. So I'll use VCO2 as the sub. I'm just remembering there that the sawtooths for some reason on this are an octave higher, so I can leave it on the same octave. That's got some weight, that, hasn't it? Let's make that into a, should we put this as a square sub? Squares come from VCO1, so we'll VCO1, I'm going to put this onto the sawtooth. Again, different sounds, aren't they? I might not be doing exactly the same amount of modulation depth on the cutoff, and the times might be slightly different, but the sounds. This sounds a lot more locked on, I think. A little bit phasey. I think that sounds fatter, actually. Really difficult to say, because in some instances that's what you want, but this has got a bit more sort of mid-tone, hasn't it? Yeah, I'm not sure I like the sort of phasiness on that. Sounds almost like two squares. But it's not, it's definitely a sawtooth. But if we wanted to add some noise to this, I can't on this. And that might cut through better in the mix. Definitely got an old school sort of tone, that though, hasn't it, the Monologue? So next up I thought let's look at some PWM tones. So a single oscillator. Let's have a look at that over here. So far so good, they sound similar, but if we then add a second PWM oscillator in, maybe at a higher range. This can't do that because we've only got a saw and a triangle. So if we add a second oscillator, and now I'm realising it really is a shame it's missing that extra square on this VCO2. It's not really until you try and compare one to the other you start finding out what's lacking, because you work within your limitations, don't you? So let's see what this sounds like using a triangle for the second oscillator then. So. Much nicer sound from that perspective, isn't it? They're using the pulse, and it's a shame this can't do that. So I think it's interesting that at the outset I thought, well, it doesn't matter, I've never really noticed. As soon as you realise what you're missing, I'd really like to be able to do this. And of course with this then I can add a sub. This can't do that, and then I can add some noise. Obviously, bass station's got more depth there because it's got the sub in. You may think I'm being unfair comparing the Monologue with the bass station, but it does have a nicer tone when you just listen to the oscillators on their own. And here's another where I've had to use the LFO as a one-shot sort of envelope generator, just because the cut-offs coming in at a slow attack. Again, this is sounding, the bass station sounded a little bit smoother. Again, I'm copying a bass station sound onto the Monologue here, so slightly unfair from that perspective. I feel like I've been a little bit unfair on the Monologue because the bass station does have more function, so when I'm trying to copy function to function, there's always going to be things on the Monologue I can't match from the bass station. So just to sort of even things up a little bit, this is one of the Aphex Twin sequencers. And that's the sort of thing we can't do on the bass station because we've got these 4 lanes of parameter changes. So maybe it's only fair to sort of round up what the two of them can do. The bass station's got a third oscillator and it's got noise that you can add as well on top of the 3 oscillators. It's got an arpeggiator, it's got 4 times 32 step sequences per patch, 2 independent ADSR envelopes, it's got the Aphex mode, it's paraphonic. I've not showed the paraphonic mode on this, but essentially 2 notes play 2 things at once, and there's an awful lot of little minor things like that. I say minor, it's not that minor I suppose. You can adjust the external input volume, it's got 7 filter options, it's got bipolar modulation on everything, And it's got aftertouch. I've not mentioned aftertouch before. And the Monologue's got 4-channel parameter lock on each of the sequencers, and it's got better editing capabilities with the sequencers using these switches. The lights are really handy. It's got the wave shaping ability for the triangle and the sawtooth on VCO1. It's got the adjustable LFO speeds from slow to fast. It's got much higher range of LFO and the single shot LFO, but that's only because it hasn't got the extra generator, I suppose. But it's also got a knob per function. It's got less knobs, less functions, but that does make it simpler to use. If I could only keep one of them, I'm not sure. It's a really difficult list. I think it'd be the bass station, but maybe not. I've got other things I think that cover the bass station sound. It is a bit more Rolandy, and the Monologue stands out on its own a bit more. I think it's a bit more aggressive. So, I never thought I'd say this. I thought the bass station would be the overall winner just because of all the amazing functions it's got on it. But I do have 3 oscillator synths, and I do have the Sub 37. So for me, if I was going to keep one of them, I think it'd be the Monologue. Which surprises me because the bass station comes across as just having so much more functionality and function rich. But I have got other synths that do that. The Monologue does have a distinct sound. So I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere. See you next time.